Hello everyone, today we are going to discuss in detail regarding what is meant by psychoanalytic criticism. So what is meant by psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic criticism? The theory is actually begun with the tradition of Sigmund Freud. So we need to note that when a literary critic does psychoanalysis on a particular literary work, he will actually try to understand the unconscious elements of the character and also the unconscious kind of desires which are actually present in the writer who write the particular literary work. So we need to note that the critic actually see or views the literary work as if it is like a dream. So the dream state of the mind, the things which are actually subconsciously deeply buried in the mind, all those things this literary critic will try to analyze and interpret. So that way we should see the psychoanalytic criticism. So regarding psychoanalytic criticism and the major writers or the major theorists associated with it, we will discuss in great detail in this video lecture. So psychoanalytic criticism is actually any form of criticism that draws on psychoanalysis. It will understand the role of unconscious psychological drives and impulses that actually shapes human behavior or artistic production. So that way we need to understand. So generally speaking, we can see that there are three major schools of psychoanalytic criticism, which is Freudian criticism, Jungian criticism and also Lacanian criticism. So regarding these three schools of criticism, we are going to explain now. So regarding Freudian criticism, when we come across the criticism of Freud, Freud have the idea that literary artists, they will suppress many of their unconscious thought processes, and these things are actually revealed through their literary works. And apart from that, when a reader reads a particular kind of literary work, the unconscious desires of the reader is actually automatically fulfilled through this literary work or any art form. So that's why the reader will like the literary work or he will be in favor of that literary work. So we can see nowadays in movies also, many of the things we see. So many of the things that we can't do in the society, that is actually seen in the movies. So by that way, the audience will get an enrichment or some kind of pleasure feel. So that is because many of our suppressed feelings are actually fulfilled through these kinds of literary work or art forms. That's why these movies or literary work, which are actually representing many things, will actually enrich the audience. So as a psychoanalyst, Freud is actually thinking of understanding the biography of the author or the audience mind and also the characters, so that the suppressed or the unconscious desires of these characters or authors are actually understood through these kinds of analysis, we can say. So in short, Freudian criticism actually analyzes the Freudian images in a particular literary work, so that the unconscious desires of the author or the character is actually revealed through that process. We will also come across the Freudian model of psychoanalysis. We can see three states of mind according to the Freud exist, which is id, ego and superego. So what is meant by id? It is actually something which is more connected with our unconscious part actually. So it acts as a storehouse of our desires, wishes and also fears. And also we need to see that it is something that is more connected with our lower kind of pleasures. That means sudden pleasure seeking kind of elements are actually mostly present in it. For example, we can say the psychosexual development is mostly associated with it, the feeling of libido. So for example, if you see, just if you feel like sleeping, we are supposed to sleep. Or if you feel like we are hungry, we have to have the food. That is actually the pleasure that is formed from the id. So it is actually a simple pleasure and that will die as the deed ends. So that kind of, it is mostly not as a lower form of pleasure, and it is actually immediate kind of pleasure that the brain tried to seek for an individual, that we can say. So next one is actually ego. Ego is actually partially conscious part of our mind, we can say. So it acts as a bridge between this id and superego. So mostly according to the society, there are some kind of accepted kind of belief systems, values, and according to that, if we don't go, we will face problems. So that kind of idea this ego is giving. The things which we have learned already, from all these things we will understand that all the pleasures which are sought by the id is not possible. So using our ego, we will control many of the id also. So that way we can see ego is. So when we come across superego, we can see that it is more like an ideal form that society gives. So some ideal kind of value system is there, some ideal belief system is there. So that way we are supposed to go. So our conscious always argues with us that we should always go by this, and because of that some ideal kind of system is actually made by the social pressures. So according to that, the individual will maximum try to go, but it is super ego, it is ideal. Most of the time it is not possible, but through ego we will try our maximum to go accordingly, so that we will get a good position in the society. So by doing this, what happens is that many of the pleasures which are sought by the id, we have to suppress. So ego will always act as a bridge between this id and superego, that we should know. So these are the three stages of mind propounded by Sigmund Freud, which is id, ego and superego. So next we will come to Jungian criticism, which is actually propounded by the psychoanalyst Carl Jung. So we can see that the important point that Carl Jung says is the idea of collective unconscious, we can say. So collective unconscious is something that is actually formed from the tradition of the society, something which is formed from the culture of the society, which is not actually influenced by the present state of the generation, but because of the ancestors. The influence of the ancestors or the previous generation always plays an important role in shaping the present unconscious state of the character, which is mostly connected with the cultural kind of factors. So we can see that in this type of criticism, the perception of ourselves is actually shaped by the symbolic art of language rather than the imaginary form of pre-linguistic thought, we can say. So language forms an important role in shaping the consciousness or the thought processes or the belief system of the character. So you are supposed to know that the collective unconscious of an individual is actually connected with the other tradition or the other aspects, cultural aspects, which is not actually directly connected with the present state of the individual, we can say. So for example, to understand that, I will say the example of Emperor Jones. So in literature there is a famous play called Emperor Jones. In that we can say that Emperor Jones is actually a black African American person, and he is actually a cruel person in the play. He is more like a dictator. He went to an island and he will act like he is an emperor and he can only be killed by a silver bullet. That kind of story we can see. So here we can see that that person is very cruel, but we can see when we check the history of the African Americans, they are actually put under slaves. But here he is a dictator. Why that happens? So as an explanation, we can see the collective unconscious of the African American plays an important role. Actually what happens is that during the climax of the play, he will run through a forest. He was actually about to be killed by the natives of that place. He had to run through the forest, and in that place he will see many illusions of the sufferings which were undergone by the African Americans of his previous ancestors or previous generation. So why he come to know about it? He don't have any direct experience about that, but still he knows that. He will see the apparitions regarding that. So when we bring that work under psychoanalysis, we can see that it might be the unconscious or the collective unconscious of the character that is actually making him to see these apparitions. So that kind of way we need to understand the idea of collective unconscious, which is actually connected with the belief system and also the cultural or traditional kind of elements of the previous generation or of the particular individual, we can say. So next we will come to the Lacanian criticism. So what is meant by Lacanian criticism? That the unconscious and our perception of the world is actually shaped by the symbolic thought of language rather than the imaginary thought of pre-linguistic thought, we can say. That means the symbolic state of the language, symbolic use of language or the symbolic elements of the language plays an important role in understanding the or controlling the consciousness of an individual, we can say. So to prove his idea, he will also take an example from Edgar Allan Poe, his famous work, The Purloined Letter. He will use it for analyzing and interpreting in this psychoanalytic mode. So now we will talk about Lacan's model of psyche. So there are three types of psyche according to Jacques Lacan, which are imaginary, symbolic and real. So regarding imaginary state of mind, we can say when a child is 6 to 18 months old, we can see this kind of imaginary stage. It is actually a pre-verbal or verbal stage of a child in which he will actually try to move more away from his mother, and also he will develop some kind of sense. But the development of sense is still incomplete in the imaginary state, we can say. So the child will be around 6 to 18 months. During this time period gap, we can see this imaginary state of mind according to Jacques Lacan. Next we can see the symbolic state of a child. So here we can see that in a symbolic state, according to Lacan, the child will slowly come to develop his language, his or her language. So here we can see that the child will slowly move away from the mother and will get more close to his or her father. So father is actually a symbol of power, language, or some kind of rules, laws, etc. according to Lacan. And we can see that phallic symbol or phallic kind of stage. So father is actually seen as a symbol of phallus, we can say, according to Lacan. And phallus, the term phallus is actually used arguably as a general neutral term, we can say. So actually we have to know that the child will learn the language and also come to know about the rules and laws of the society and try to get attached with it. That kind of stage we can say it is a symbolic stage. So here symbol is actually more associated with language. So language actually make us understand how the power structure works actually and how we should live in the society. That kind of idea the symbolic state will give an individual, we can see. So according to Lacan, imaginary state is there, symbolic state is there, and also one more is there, which is real stage. So real state, what is meant by that? It is actually more like an unattainable stage, we can say. So we will always feel some kind of lack in that state because the happiness or the stage we attained before the imaginary stage when we do not know the language. So after learning the language, we come across many kind of system, many kind of things, many kind of lack we have. That realization we will get. So we will be in real state after this symbolic state. So we will always long for that stage which was before imaginary stage where language was not a medium. So that kind of stage is a real stage which is always unattainable and some kind of imperfectness we feel, some kind of lack we will feel during this stage of development, we can say. So there are 3 stages of development according to Lacan. 3 stages of psyche according to Lacan, which is imaginary state, symbolic state, and also real state. So now we will see how a literary work is actually interpreted according to the psychoanalytic criticism. So how it is? Actually the dreams or the desires or the unconscious kind of thought processes of the author or the characters is actually studied deeply so that these elements will be understood. So it argues that literary works like dreams will actually reveal the unconscious fears and anxieties of the author, and also it is actually a representation of the neurosis of the author, we can say. So in that manner we can understand many hidden elements which are actually present in the life of the author, and also whether he have any fear or these kind of things, how actually he represented in literary work. So even without the notice of the author, he will accidentally represent his anxieties through his literary work. So a psychoanalytic critic will try to understand those kind of things by undergoing psychoanalysis in the author's literary work. So the author's traumas, family life, problems faced in family life, or sexual traumas, or anxieties, anything if we have. So all those things will be indirectly represented by him even without his knowledge. So unconsciously or subconsciously he might write those things in literary works. So those elements will be understood by a psychoanalyst, we can say. So all these projections are actually author's psyche according to psychoanalysts like Lacan. So now we will talk about how to read a text using psychoanalysis. So we can see that when we understand a narrator in a novel or a play, we need to note that if the narrator is showing any kind of anxiety, any kind of trauma he is actually representing through his dialogues, through his language, the way he speaks, whether he is showing any kind of fear or any kind of tongue slip is happening in his dialogues, or some kind of puns will be used. So that can be some kind of unconscious kind of influence of the author, we can say. So narrator always represents the author who wrote that particular literary work. So analyzing those characters, we can see how the subconscious elements operates in a literary work. So for example, we can see when we consider Hamlet. So Hamlet is actually seen as a tragic hero, so who will try to take revenge upon the villain Claudius. So here procrastination is actually an important tragic flaw, we can see. So according to a psychoanalyst, we can see that there are many kinds of reasons, there might be many kinds of reasons that made Hamlet to do this procrastination. So one such interpretation is the Oedipal attachment that Hamlet feels for his mother Gertrude. So because of this attachment, which is subconsciously inside the Hamlet's mind, because of this reason, he itself is not aware of this, but when he comes to know that King Hamlet, who is actually the father figure or father of Hamlet, so when he is actually killed by Claudius, his subconscious mind might be saying that actually Claudius killed King Hamlet, and actually this was actually the subconscious desire of Hamlet to kill his father King Hamlet. So just because Claudius fulfilled his subconscious desire, Hamlet is trying to procrastinate his revenge. So that kind of interpretation we can say because of the Oedipal attachment. So Oedipus Complex you have to look in detail, then you will understand how it is. So that kind of interpretation a psychoanalyst can give. So here the character we are deeply understanding. So even though in the story there is no signs of this Oedipus complex, by analyzing the behavior of the character and also the how the mind state of the character works, we can even interpret those kinds of things. So that's how a psychoanalysis becomes very useful. So we can make use of the characters, the behavior of the characters, the dialogue delivery of the characters, the pun or the tongue slips used in the between the languages. So it is more like a symbolic state, we can say, symbolic elements used in the language. Through that also we can interpret how these things are operating. So even though psychoanalysis is actually a medical term to understand the mind of the character by counseling a person, just like that we can undergo psychoanalysis of a character also. Because character is actually a projection of other's mind. His own anxieties are there, his own problems are there, even the problems faced by many people in the society during that time, it is also reflected in a particular literary work. So in that case, by undergoing psychoanalysis of a character, we can understand many aspects of the society or the people or even the author, or if the author have any kinds of fear during his time period, all these things we can understand by undergoing psychoanalysis of that particular literary work. So some important questions this psychoanalyst will actually ask while they read this kind of literary works. They will ask about the character. If there is any kind of fears existing in the character, how is the behavior of the character? What kind of language is used by the character, whether he is showing too much fear, too much kind of sadness or too much happiness, or how the language is used, and what are the symbols used in the literary work, whether the symbols of death and sexuality is more in the literary work. So if those kinds of elements are there, it is actually showing the anxiety of the character, or some kind of suppressed feelings of the character is actually showing through these symbols. So those kinds of things this psychoanalyst will check upon. These kinds of questions usually these psychoanalytic critics will see while they interpret these kinds of literary work, or they undergo psychoanalysis for a particular character of a literary work. So that's all about psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic criticism. I hope that you understood this term psychoanalysis, and also I hope that this video is useful for you. So we will also explain some other kind of criticism topics. So you can also suggest your topics in the comment section so that I will give the lectures accordingly. So we will meet again with the next lecture. Thank you and have a nice day.